you live for the days when the band is together, because there's nothing can quite equal it. Nothing's quite like having a man in every corner in the room.
Some bands break up but get back together later, while others end for good. Dire Straits is one of the bands that ended permanently. Even though they were one of the greatest rock bands ever, they won't be making a comeback. The only person who could bring them back is Mark Knopfler, the band's lead and main creative mind. He has said that the story of Dire Straits is over. But will Dire Straits ever reunite? And why won't the magic ever be rekindled? Join us as we unravel the shocking reason why Dire Straits will never return again. The story of Dire Straits. The amazing journey of Dire Straits really began in a small and modest recording studio in London called Pathway Studios. It wasn't a flashy place, but it was where something special was about to happen. The band had gone there to record a demo, a sample of their songs, hoping to get noticed. Among the tracks they recorded that day, one stood out above the rest. It was called Sultans of Swing. This song wasn't like the loud, wild rock anthems that filled stadiums, nor was it a tearful ballad made to tug at heartstrings. Sultans of Swing was something else entirely, a musical story. It was inspired by a real moment that stuck in Mark Knopfler's mind. He once saw a small jazz band playing in a nearly empty bar. There was no crowd, no fancy lights, no cheering fans, just a group of musicians pouring their hearts into the music, simply because they loved to play. That quiet, beautiful moment left a lasting impression on him. When Mark got home, he picked up his guitar and wrote the song, filled with the bluesy sound he loved and a style of storytelling that painted a picture in the listener's mind. At first, the song didn't get much attention. It didn't seem like a hit, but everything changed when BBC radio DJ Charlie Gillett played the demo on his show. The response was immediate and powerful. Listeners flooded the station with calls, all asking to hear the song again. Suddenly, people were talking about Dire Straits. Record labels, who hadn't paid much attention before, were now interested. Before long, the band had signed a deal with Vertigo Records and was back in the studio, this time to make their first full album. That debut album, simply titled Dire Straits, came out in 1978. It was a breath of fresh air at a time when punk bands like the Sex Pistols and The Clash were dominating the scene with raw, aggressive energy. Instead, Dire Straits offered something calmer, more thoughtful, and deeply emotional. Songs like Down to the Waterline, Water of Love, and Setting Me Up blended folk, blues, and classic rock into a sound that was completely their own. Mark Knopfler's guitar playing was unlike anything people had heard.
The legendary guitarist and singer Mark Knopfler has been making music
Smooth and silky, yet sharp and precise. Music critics took notice, and many began comparing him to legends like Bob Dylan and Eric Clapton. The album was a huge success, especially in the United States, where fans loved the honesty and soul in the music. Sultans of Swing climbed all the way to number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100, turning Dire Straits from an unknown band into international stars. And that was only the beginning. As the years went on, the band's popularity continued to grow. They followed up with albums like Communique in 1979, Making Movies in 1980, and Love Over Gold in 1982, each one adding new layers to their sound and earning them even more fans. But nothing could prepare the world for what came in 1985. That year, Dire Straits released Brothers in Arms, the album that would become their biggest triumph. It wasn't just a commercial success, it was a game changer. It became the first album ever to sell more than 1 million copies on CD, signaling a major shift in how people listened to music. Suddenly, the CD wasn't just a new invention, it was the future. The album included unforgettable songs like Money for Nothing, Walk of Life, and So Far Away. Money for Nothing, with its catchy guitar riff and sharp commentary on the glamorous world of rock stars, became one of the most iconic songs of the decade. Its music video was a regular feature on MTV, helping to define the look and sound of the 1980s. But with massive success came massive pressure. Dire Straits was no longer just a band. They were now a global brand. The music industry demanded more. More albums, more interviews, more shows. The band was constantly on the move, playing in front of tens of thousands of fans, city after city, night after night, with barely a moment to rest. For Mark Knopfler, who had always cared more about the music than the fame, it started to take a toll. What began as a passion project, just 4 guys recording songs in a little studio, had turned into a non-stop whirlwind. The simple joy of making music was now buried under the weight of fame, expectations, and endless touring. But what led to the sudden closure? Let's take a closer look. The quiet end of Dire Straits. As Dire Straits became more and more popular, things began to change, especially for Mark Knopfler. When the band was small, he had control over everything. He knew what he wanted the music to sound like, and the excitement of rising fame gave him energy. But as the band grew larger, that control started slipping from his hands. What once felt thrilling now felt heavy, like a burden resting on his shoulders. The very band he had worked so hard to build no longer felt like it belonged to him. By this time, things were clearly falling apart behind the scenes. Tensions were building, and they were no longer easy to ignore. Some members of the band felt like their creative voices didn't matter anymore. The band they had helped shape was turning into something unfamiliar. David Knopfler, Mark's younger brother and a founding member, had already left the band in 1980. He and Mark had always clashed creatively. David wanted more freedom and spontaneity, while Mark was a perfectionist who liked things done in a very specific way. Their differences became painfully obvious while they were working on their second album, Communique, in 1979. Mark wasn't just writing the songs, he was also controlling every step of the recording process, from the biggest decisions to the tiniest details. David, who cared deeply about expressing himself through music, began to feel like he was just a background player in his own band. Things got worse during the recording of their third album, Making Movies, in 1980. Mark's demand for perfection grew stronger, and he insisted on redoing parts of songs over and over if he wasn't completely satisfied with David's playing. Eventually, David felt like he barely had a place in the band anymore. Feeling frustrated and creatively drained, he made the difficult decision to leave the group right in the middle of the album's production. He never came back. Mark finished Making Movies with help from Roy Bittan of the E Street Band. The album became one of Dire Straits' biggest successes. Still, David had no regrets. In later interviews, he explained that he didn't leave out of anger. He simply felt it was time to move on. David's departure marked a big change in the band's direction. They began to aim for a more complex and ambitious sound, but that didn't sit well with everyone. Pick Withers, Dire Straits' original drummer, had always liked a simpler, more classic blues rock style. When Mark began exploring longer, more experimental songs like Telegraph Road, Withers felt disconnected. The music no longer felt like something he could relate to. After finishing the tour for Love Over Gold, he quietly left the band too. There was no drama, just a calm understanding that it was time for him to step away. Even with these big changes, Dire Straits kept climbing higher. Their 1985 album Brothers in Arms was a massive success, making them one of the biggest bands in the world. But this success came with a price. The Brothers in Arms tour lasted an exhausting 14 months and included over 300 performances around the globe. Every night, they played to crowds of tens of thousands of fans. On the surface, everything looked great, but behind the scenes, the non-stop pressure was taking its toll. Mark Knopfler, who had always been deeply focused on the music itself, started to feel disconnected from the band. The endless cycle of touring, the constant demands from record labels, and the pressure to stay commercially successful made it feel like he was no longer in charge. John Illsley, the only other founding member still in the band, felt the same way. They still loved making music, but that joy was getting buried under a mountain of expectations and obligations. After their final tour, the On Every Street tour from 1991 to 1992, Dire Straits slowly faded away. There was no official goodbye. The tour had lasted more than a year, but it didn't reach the same heights as their earlier ones. When Mark stepped off the stage in Zaragoza, Spain, in October 1992, he quietly knew it was the end of Dire Straits. There were no announcements, no farewell tour, no press releases. The band simply stopped existing. For the next 3 years, Mark rarely spoke about Dire Straits. He stepped away from the spotlight, choosing instead to focus on writing music for films, working on personal projects, and helping other artists. Then, in 1995, when he was finally asked about the band's status, his response was simple and clear: Dire Straits is over. There was no bitterness, no dramatic ending, just the quiet closing of a long, complicated chapter in music history. Will Dire Straits ever come back together again? Let's find out. Why Dire Straits will never reunite. In the world of rock music, it's not rare for legendary bands to reunite. From the Eagles to Led Zeppelin, many groups that once claimed they were done have eventually returned to the stage. But for Dire Straits, the story is different. They didn't break up because of arguments or drama. Yet that doesn't mean they're a band that could ever come back together. Their final tour drained them, emotionally and physically. Mark Knopfler, the band's frontman, admitted there were mornings he woke up not even knowing where he was. The schedule was grueling, with city after city and venue after venue packed with fans, but the music no longer connected with him the same way it once did. "I had a great time while it lasted," he said, "but when it got too big, I didn't even know the names of everyone on the crew. It had become a massive machine. This machine had taken them to unimaginable height, but it also pushed them to the breaking point. Despite this, the name Dire Straits still carries great appeal. Over the years, their former management has received offer after offer for a reunion tour. Major event organizers and music festivals have been willing to pay huge sums just to have the band back on stage one last time. But Mark has turned down every single one. It wasn't about the money. Though the temptation was there, he admitted, music was never about nostalgia or making money. It was about creating something real. Mark, a perfectionist, didn't want to simply recreate the past to make a quick profit. And it's not just Mark who feels this way. Even the other surviving members of Dire Straits have no desire to reunite. John Illsley, the band's longtime bassist who stayed from start to finish, still keeps in touch with Mark and the others. But while they respect each other, they all agree that the spirit that once drove the band is gone. Dire Straits wasn't just Mark Knopfler. It was a collective, a chemistry that existed at a certain time and place, and that time has passed. David Knopfler, who left the band early, never even thought about coming back. P. Withers lost interest in the music industry a long time ago, and the later members, while still active in music, have moved on from what they once had. There's no real desire to bring back Dire Straits, not from the fans, but not from the people who made it what it was. The clearest sign of this came in 2018 when Dire Straits was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. This should have been a huge moment. Most bands in their position would reunite, if not for a tour, at least for one last performance. Some would even make it a sentimental occasion, mending old conflicts and celebrating their legacy. But Dire Straits did none of that. Mark didn't even attend. There was no grand introduction from a rock legend, no emotional speeches, and no triumphant reunion on stage. John Illsley was the only one who accepted the award on behalf of the band, and the moment passed quietly, far from the spectacle everyone expected. When asked why he skipped the ceremony, Mark's answer was simple: "I had no reason to be there." It wasn't out of bitterness or a lack of respect. It was just his way of saying that Dire Straits had already had its time. Even though the band itself is long gone, their music hasn't faded. Dire Straits remains one of the most respected rock bands in history. Their songs are still played and loved by generations of fans. While people continue to wonder what happened to the members after the lights went out, the truth is, none of them tried to relive the past. Of all the members, no one's post-Dire Straits career was as successful as Mark Knopfler's. So, What was Mark Knopfler's musical story like? Let's find out. Mark Knopfler's musical journey. Before Dire Straits became world-famous rock stars, Mark Knopfler had to find his own path in music, a journey that began with a deep love for the guitar. Mark was born on August 12, 1949, in Glasgow, Scotland. His family wasn't musical in the traditional sense, but they were smart, thoughtful people. His father was an architect and also a skilled chess player who had fled Hungary in 1939 to escape the horrors of World War II and the Nazi regime. His mother worked as a teacher, and both parents valued education and creativity. When Mark was 8 years old, the family moved to Newcastle, England. This would become the city where he spent most of his childhood and teenage years. Although no one in the family made a living from music, there was always music in the background. One of Mark's earliest and most cherished memories was hearing his uncle play boogie-woogie piano and lively harmonica tunes during family gatherings. It was these magical sounds that first caught young Mark's ear. Like many British kids growing up in the 1960s, Mark was obsessed with Hank Marvin, the guitar hero from the band The Shadows. He dreamed of owning a beautiful red Fender Stratocaster guitar, just like the one Marvin played. But when Mark asked his father for one, he didn't get his dream guitar. Instead, his father gave him a cheaper model, a Hofner Super Solid. It wasn't fancy, but it was enough to light the fire. That simple guitar was the beginning of a passion that would last a lifetime. Even though Mark loved music, he didn't chase a music career right away. He decided to play it safe and studied journalism instead. He spent a year at Harlow College and then got a job as a trainee journalist at the Yorkshire Evening Post. Writing for a newspaper helped him become a better storyteller, something that would later show in his lyrics. But no matter how busy he was, his love for music never faded. On his days off, he would play his guitar for hours, perform in small pubs, or jam with friends. During his time as a journalist, Mark met the poet Basil Bunting. Bunting's ideas about creativity and art stuck with him and helped shape the way Mark thought about music and storytelling. Still, journalism never felt like his true calling. Deep down, he knew he belonged in music. So he made a bold decision. He quit his job and set out to explore the world, hitchhiking through England and Europe. He survived by playing music in small cafes and bars, living like a wandering artist. Mark was heavily influenced by blues legends like Chet Atkins, Scotty Moore, and B.B. King. He admired their style and emotion. But unlike most guitar players, Mark didn't use a pick. His unique fingerpicking style happened by accident. One day, he got an old acoustic guitar with a bent neck. It was nearly impossible to play with a pick because the strings kept breaking, so he used his fingers instead. That accident turned out to be a blessing. It gave him the smooth, expressive sound that would one day become his trademark. In the 1960s, Mark played in a small band with his school friend Sue Hercombe. They even got to appear on local TV, which was a big deal back then. Later, he joined a blues rock band called Brewer's Droop. It wasn't a long-term gig, but it gave him his first taste of life as a professional musician. By 1973, Mark had earned a degree from the University of Leeds. While studying, he kept playing music and even recorded a demo called Summer's Coming My Way. He then formed a band called The Silver Heels with friends Steve Phillip, Dave Johnson, and Paul Granger. Unfortunately, the group didn't make it big. After they split, Mark took a teaching job at Loughton College, but he never stopped performing. He joined another band called Cafe Racers, and this turned out to be a key turning point. Around the same time, Mark's younger brother David Knopfler had moved to London. The two brothers started making music together, writing songs and creating guitar riffs. They had great chemistry, and the ideas kept flowing. Soon, they teamed up with bassist John Ilsley, a talented musician who fit right in with the group. The three of them had a natural musical connection. While punk rock was taking over the music scene with its loud and rebellious sound, Mark and his band were doing something different. Their music was calm but powerful, filled with emotional guitar playing, thoughtful lyric, and rich melodies. It was music that told stories. The final piece of the puzzle was drummer Pick Withers. Once he joined the group, everything just clicked. In 1977, the band Dire Straits was officially born. None of them could have imagined what would happen next. Within a year, people all over the world were talking about them. What do you think about Dire Straits? Likely reunion? Let us know your answer in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe.